So today we're going to be creating different lighting effects in Photopea. With the image provided, you can see a list of different type of lighting effects on the top portion of the image. And then down on the bottom, we have a landscape that we're going to modify some images to create the sense that they are part of the actual image. But starting at the top, we see laser pulse. With the laser pulse, we're going to go over to the left side navigation and click on the polygon lasso tool. With the polygon lasso tool, we're going to draw out a laser pulse with a thicker side on one end and then a more narrow side on the other. So I can click point by point. Then I'm going to look to round out the right side of the image and then go back to where I started. Then I'm going to look to fill in this area, but we want to make sure that we create a layer for this laser pulse. So I'm going to click down on the bottom right side, new layer, and I'm going to relabel layer 1 laser pulse. Then I can go up to edit at the top navigation, down to fill, and I want to make sure that my fill color is white, and I can click OK. Then we want to make sure to deselect. To deselect on a PC, it is Control D. On a Mac, Command D. Then I want to look to blur this image out. If I'm thinking of a laser pulse, it's shooting from a cannon or shooting from some type of futuristic gun. I want to think about creating that motion. So I'm going to look to go and apply two different types of blurs. The first blur, I'm going to go to Filter at the top navigation, down to Blur, and to Gaussian Blur. With Gaussian Blur, we see that it automatically creates that soft edge around the entire pulse. I can modify the radius to get more of a sharp edge, but what I'm really looking for is to get that soft edge all around the image. So for myself, I'm going to drop this to about 6.6 pixels. Once I'm satisfied with that, I can click OK. Then I'm going to look to modify and add a motion blur. So I'm going to go back up to Filter at the top navigation, down to Motion Blur. I can slide this down so I can see the motion blur being applied. I have the motion blur or the pulse going from left to right. So I want to make sure that I'm still following that left to right angle. So just going at 0 degrees. And I can adjust the distance. As I adjust the distance, you start to see it stretches out, creating a little bit more sense of speed as it flies through the air. And click OK. If I feel like I need more, I can always go back up to Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur again. And again, just adjust as I like to see how I can stretch it out even further. But now that once we have the laser pulse drawn out with the white, we want to add a glow to give that more futuristic effect. If you think Star Wars, you think some more futuristic movies, you might likely see a different color on the object. So I'm going to look to apply a layer style on top of this image. So I'm going to go down to the EFF layer style, and I'm going to click on outer glow. With outer glow, my default color is set right now to this pink color. If I want to modify the color, I can always adjust over on the left side navigation. Under the color picker, I can click and drag inside the area, or I can drag on the hue bar and change the color, the tone, to get something entirely different. Once I'm satisfied with the color, I can click OK. And you also have the option of adding an inner glow as well. Inner glow will just really help emphasize that color overall. So if I click on inner glow over on the left side, right now my color is showing up as pink. I'm going to modify my blend mode. My blend mode will help allow me to see the color a little bit more visibly. So I'm going to switch this over to normal, and we see how the pink overtakes the entire green. And right now, as I put in this green color, it's a little bit too overwhelming. So I want to look to modify my spread and size. I can look to drop the opacity as well to reduce down that green, that strength. I can also look at different blend modes to see if it's going to appear a little bit stronger, a little bit better with different features. So if I go down to darken, or if I do color burn, we get that white appearing a little bit stronger, but we still get a little bit of strength of that green appearing on the outside edge. I can always go back and modify my layer style. So if I want to go back to the outer glow, I can look to push up the strength of it. If it's too strong, I can reduce or expand out with the size and spread. But it's really for you to test out and see how it's going to apply onto our laser pulse that we've created. You just want to make sure that we don't necessarily have that sharp edge that we're seeing like this. So I can pull this back up to get that softer edge, that softer glow around the area. Once I'm satisfied with it, I can click OK. And now we're going to move over to the lightsaber. With the lightsaber, if you think of Star Wars, it's that more futuristic sword. But we need to really start it out by adding in the handle. So I'm going to go up to File, Open in Place. And from the images provided, I'm going to choose out my lightsaber handle and click Open. And I can reduce down the size, grabbing the top corner. And once I'm satisfied with that placement, I can hit Enter or Return. I can move this object over to the left or right, but I just want to create a little bit of space that I can expand a light beam coming from the handle of the lightsaber. If I want to modify this in any way, I can go to Edit, Free Transform. Then I can rotate this a little bit. So I'm going to still have a little bit of a diagonal light beam, but I want it to be coming from the end of our handle. So what we want to do is make sure that we create a new layer specifically for the light beam of our lightsaber. So over on the right side navigation, I'm going to rename the handle . And then I'm going to go down to the bottom of the layers panel and click on New Layer. So with our lightsaber beam layer, I'm going to go over to the left side navigation, over to our second tool, the rectangle select. With the rectangle select, we want to modify the way our feather appears. If I draw out a simple rectangle and I look to fill this in, I'm going to go up to Edit at the top navigation, Fill. I have white already set from our last design. I click OK. Right now we see just a simple rectangle with sharp edges. Instead, I'm going to undo, step back. You are going to modify the feather at the top navigation. The feather will help create softness around the area as well as round out the corners with that rectangle select. So I'm going to change my feather to 6 pixels. With the 6 pixels entered in for the feather, I'm going to click and drag to create a long rectangle to create out our lightsaber beam. And as soon as I release on the mouse, you're going to see that it rounded out the corners on the object. And when I go to fill this, I'm going to go back up to edit, fill. I have it set to white. I click OK. It actually softened up the entire area so that we're not seeing rounded corners, but we're seeing that soft glow like a lightsaber. And just like we did with the laser pulse, we're going to look to add in some layer styles, some outer glow. So I'm going to go down to the bottom of the layers panel, click on layer style, EFF, add an outer glow. And for each of the designs that we're doing, laser pulse, lightsaber, fairy dust, and light orb, you're going to pick out a different color for each. So if I wanted to pick out this magenta or pink color, I can click OK. I'm going to click OK again. And then I'm going to look to modify the placement. So currently we have this lightsaber appearing in front of our lightsaber handle. I'm actually going to click and drag the lightsaber beam underneath of the handle. And then I'm going to look to rotate this, edit. I can go free transform or transform and rotate. But with free transform, I can grab a corner, click and drag, try to match the angle that we have for the handle. And I can look to scale it down if I feel like it doesn't necessarily fit, or it's too long, or too wide. I can look to reduce it down, scale it down so it fits better to the overall shape. Once I'm satisfied with the placement, I can hit enter. And there is my lightsaber. For the fairy dust, we're going to look to modify a customized brush. To start out, we're going to go over to the right side navigation. And along this right side navigation, we're going to see a number of different shortened words. So INF, info, properties, and then we'll see brush. Brush will show us different variations of brushes that we can select, but we're going to look to customize and create our own unique brush. Before we do anything, I recommend that you create a new layer, and we can rename this layer Fairy Dust. I'm going to move it on top of the lightsaber handle. But once we've created this separate layer for the fairy dust, we're going to look to select out one of the brushes that we can modify. So if I look at the different options available, I'm going to click on the 24 in the top right side. It's a softer edge where you can see that it's very strong in the middle, and then on the edge it kind of fades away. With this 24 selected, I can modify the size of the brush at any point, but I want to show you how we can modify and create a more custom brush using the different options in this brush panel. So looking at this first section, we're not really going to see much difference except for the spacing. Down on the bottom, we'll see spacing. As I click and drag this to the right or left, you see that it gets more condensed to create a solid line, or it expands out to see dots separated. I'm going to separate the dots a little bit further, so I'm doing 153%. But now I'm going to go down the line to see how I can modify our brush even more. So if I click on Tip Dynamics, Tip Dynamics, I can go through the different variations. If I look at size jitter, we're going to notice that the little dots are appearing in different sizes. We can expand, again, more the distance between them or the size of the diameter of the dot. Angle jitter doesn't do much, but you can click and drag to see how it's going to modify. If I look at the roundness jitter, this will actually customize the shape of those little dots. So some get a little bit more condensed, some stay the same, some will expand further. And again, if I modify the minimal roundness, I can reduce some of the dots to get smaller or expand them up to get larger. The real one that we want to take a look at is scatter. With scatter, as soon as I click on it, I'm going to start to see multiple dots appear. And if I look to modify the placement, so position jitter, I see that I'm starting to expand out these dots to not necessarily line up in a single line, but scatter throughout the image. If I bring this further away, they spread out a lot further. Or if I add the count, I add in a lot more dots. You can see as I bring down the position jitter, it condenses those dots even further, so you're not really seeing any separation. But I want to try to get something a little bit more sporadic, where the dots don't necessarily line up. Now that we started to spread out these dots, I can look to modify my tip dynamic and see if I can add in more dots. If I bring this over to the right side, we start to see more dots appear together. As I move the angle jitter, some of the dots start to rotate left to right based on the direction I go. If I click back on tip shape, I can again look to spread them out. So if I pull my spacing closer together, you start to see that they get a lot more condensed. There's a lot more dots appearing. The color dynamics, you're not going to see much variation. If I bring in the jitter, I can create a little bit of fade on certain dots where they don't necessarily all stay white. Some start to disappear, or if I drag this over to the right side, turn to black, which I don't necessarily want. The hue jitter is not going to really do anything. Saturation jitter will add color, but we're going to add in color just like we did with the laser pulse and the lightsaber. So you can keep the saturation jitter there. Then the brightness jitter also creates that same idea of fading out certain dots to create the sense that there's more variation within the dots itself. So with the fairy dust, I can go over to my left side navigation. I have everything set in the brushes here, but over on the left side navigation, I'm going to click on the brush tool. With the brush tool, when I click on it, I currently have a small size brush. I'm going to look to modify the size of my brush a little bit. So it was at 6 pixels. I'm going to up it to about 24, 25. And when I click and drag, you see that it creates the sporadic arrangement of dots throughout the image. If I do that again, I can look to just bring this down. And again, with my cursor, just clicking and dragging, I create a pathway of sporadic dots, creating what is very similar to fairy dust. But I can look to help narrow this out or create the sense that it travels further back. I'm going to go over to the layers panel, and I'm going to add in a raster mask. When I click on the raster mask at the bottom of the layers panel, we see that little white square appear next to the fairy dust layer. And the reason why I did this is that I can erase out certain areas, but keep the dots if I want to go back and fix something later on. So I'm going to click on the eraser tool in the left side navigation. With the eraser tool, I can adjust the size of my cursor, hitting the right bracket or left bracket. And then I can look to erase out some areas. I can modify the opacity of my brush to make sure I can erase a little bit faster. But if I want to create the sense that it starts from a small area, you see that I'm just erasing out the left side, and then it expands out further, creating the sense that it's getting closer overall. I can get into more customization if I want to start looping the fairy dust around. Make sure if you do add in some fairy dust, you have to be selected on the actual image of the layer, not the fairy dust layer, not on the actual raster mask. So I add a little bit more just to create that sense of a trail. And again, I can always go back over to the raster mask and erase out any areas that I don't necessarily like, or if I want to create a little bit of fade. But we see how I've created more of an arc shape, like it's transitioning or following a pathway. Once I'm satisfied with this, I want to make sure to select on the actual image for the fairy dust layer. And then I can go again down to effects, outer glow. This time I'm going to change the color, pick out something new. I can look to modify the size and spread of my brush. Create a little bit softer glow. And once I'm satisfied with the fairy dust, I can click OK. For this layer with the fairy dust, I'm going to look to just scale this down just to create a little bit better space for our light orb. So I can go up to Edit, Free Transform, just scale this down. Next, with our light orb, we're going to be creating a custom light orb using simple shapes. So over on the left side navigation, I'm going to click and hold on the second icon to select the ellipse select. With the ellipse select, I'm going to draw out a circle shape. I can hold shift to maintain a perfect circle. But before we do fill this in, we have to make sure to create a new layer. So I can go up to Edit at the top navigation, Fill, click OK. So we have the white area. I'm going to draw a little circle inside of it again using the lift select. I can hold down shift, and if I need to modify the location of it, I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard to adjust the placement if I want to get it a little bit more centered. Once I'm satisfied with the placement, I can actually hit backspace or delete to cut that out. Then I'm going to look to duplicate this shape. So if I want to duplicate a shape, I can hold down Alt if I'm working on a PC, or Option if I'm working on a Mac. But holding down and I click and drag from the object, I create a duplicate of the shape. I can always go over to the layers panel, and with the light orb, I can right click and duplicate layer as well. And then just simply click and drag this over to the side. But I'm going to scale this copy up. So I'm going to go edit, free transform. I'm going to grab a corner holding shift. So I just created a bigger ring over top of the one that we've had. I can always adjust with the arrow keys again. And I'm going to click enter. So with the light orb that we've created, we're going to get into modifying this a little bit more, but we're going to look to merge these two light orb layers together. So over on the layers panel, I'm going to hold down shift on my keyboard, and I can click on the second light orb layer. If you had two different layers selected or entirely different layers selected, I can click on one light orb layer, hold down shift, and click on the other, with them both highlighted with this darker gray. I can right click again and merge layers. So it becomes one light orb layer. Like we did with the laser pulse and the lightsaber, I'm going to look to blur this out. So I'm going to go up to edit, filter at the top navigation, blur, and Gaussian blur. And I can again modify the radius how I want, but I'm going to click OK. With this light orb, I'm going to look to customize this a little bit more. Again, we can add in the layer style, add in a glow. Picking out a new color that we haven't used before. So I have this blue color. And then once I have this orb with the layer style, I'm going to duplicate this layer. Right click on the light orb copy. And I can duplicate this layer again. So this time with the duplicate of this layer, I'm going to look to modify it. So I'm going to go up to edit at the top navigation, free transform. I'm going to stretch this out to distort this shape a little bit, make it more unique. I'm going to flatten it out to create the sense that we're creating more depth within the shape. Almost creating what is like the rings around Saturn. But because we're trying to create the sense that it's wrapping around this original orb, I'm going to add in a raster mask. And with the eraser tool, I can erase out the upper side of it to create the sense that it's traveling behind the orb that we have in the front. If I wanted to do a vertical variation as well, I can duplicate the original light orb copy, again. This time I'm going to expand it out, edit, free transform, stretch it out vertically, and condense it down. Again, I'm going to add in a raster mask and use the eraser tool to erase out one side to create the sense that it's traveling behind the circle that we've originally started with. So this just shows that you can really create some customized light features that can come out very interesting or just give you the ability to experiment with something new and creative. So now if we take a look down at the bottom of the image, I'm going to zoom in closer just so we can focus on this piece. I provided a number of images. So I want to insert these images into the area. I'm going to go up to File, Open in Place. And one at a time, I'm going to place in the electric ball, the fire, and the lightning. Click Open. And make sure that you understand where your layers are. I'm going to bring this down to the bottom portion. And I can hit Enter to place it. Then I'm going to repeat the process. File. Open in Place. Choose out the fire. Click Open. Bring this down. I can bring down the size as well. And hit Enter. And then finally, File, Open in Place, choose out the lightning. Click Open. I can pull this down to the bottom. So if you notice, all three of these images have a black background. The reason why I chose these is that with this black background, we can use the blend modes. The blend modes over in the layers panel is where it says normal with the drop down. These different options will allow us to create some customized lighting features that are going to blend in with the actual image that we have behind it. So what I mean by this, if I start out with the picture of the lightning, I'm going to place this up towards the top right side. I can scale it up if I want to make it a little bit larger. Edit, free transform, just grab a corner. I can hold shift or stretch it out. But we notice that the sky, it's very dark, like a storm. So with this image of the lightning selected, I can go over to our blend modes. I'm going to click the drop down. And if I go down to this section, lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge, lighter color, if I select out lighten, you see that it does a pretty good job overall of cutting out all the black, but maintaining the light source that we saw. It's not necessarily perfect, so I may want to test out and try different features. If I click on screen, I get better glow overall, creating the sense that the lightning is really part of the picture. If I'm not necessarily happy with the piece, I can again just try different blend modes, see how they change. You see with the color dodge, it brings out some of the blue in the sky. If I bring it down or look down at the lightning at the bottom side, you see more orange. It's just adapting to the background of the image that's already provided. And you can experiment with all different variations, but you're going to notice that not all blend modes blend the image in correctly. This one section really is going to be the best option. For myself, I like the color dodge, so I'm going to leave that there. Now we're going to take a look at the fire, and we notice that you have the wood set up to create more of a campfire. So again, the same idea. I want to go over to the layers panel, click on the drop down, and try lightning or lighten, screen, see which one necessarily fits the best overall. I think for myself, I like the sparks coming off this area. I may want to reduce the size of this a little bit, so I'm going to edit, free transform, just scale this down. If I want to modify the fire or try to blend it in a little bit, I may click on the raster mask again and look to soften up the edges. But we've created what is a fire on the beach. And finally, we have this electric ball. If I wanted to, again, do that same idea of creating a teleport or some type of void, I can look to get rid of the black. So I'm going to go into blend modes, see what happens when I go through the same section. Lighten does well to knock out the black, but doesn't necessarily bring out the glow. So I may try a screen, and then we see that we get a lot better glow overall. Color dodge does it well to recognize the color around it, but doesn't bring that glow. I can click and drag to see where it necessarily fits or where it's going to fit overall for this image. I think for myself, I like the screen. So if I wanted to create the sense that there's a vortex or some type of black hole within the image, I can look to modify the shape. I can go up to edit, transform, and I'm going to click on distort. With the distort, I can look to grab the corners and modify the shape. Create the sense that there is a vortex coming from the ground. If I wanted to add any features, I can look to select out the background. With the background, I can go over to my burn and dodge tool. With the burn, I can burn in areas to create the sense that there's a hole coming from the inside. But you see how we can create different types of light sources that can be very interesting and very useful in creating something unique and different. You're going to save this, go File, Save as a PSD, and then File, Save as a PNG, and you'll upload the PNG.